I think the president-elect, the president at that point, will have to make a strategic choice about whether he wants to make life easy for himself or more difficult. And that essentially boils down to a fundamental question about whether the United States is prepared to make the investments necessary to protect the liberal international order which we created since World War II. And I think I would want him to understand that protecting this order is of fundamental importance to American national interests. And that we did not build and we do not sustain this order simply as a favor to others. We do this first and foremost because it is in our own self-interest. And he can choose to gut the order either through negligence or through acts of will. But that's not going to put him in a position where his own life is going to be easier if that's what he really wants when he comes into office. So a real renewal of the long-standing American commitment to preserve a rule-based regime in the areas of interstate behavior, in the areas of trade, in the areas of protecting security in the commons, I think is fundamental. And I think it's particularly important because of the discussion that occurred during the campaign, where the international order was seen as somehow optional from the point of view of advancing American interests. So that would be the first point I would make, adding to the list that Nick articulated. The second point that I would make has to do with issues of trade and economics. And again, the point I would make here is that the United States, at the end of the day, is a net beneficiary from the globalization that has occurred in the last 40 years. This doesn't mean that the fruits of that globalization have been shared equitably within our own country. And that is certainly a challenge that has to be addressed. But the way to do that is not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The way to do that is to look at where the consequences of globalization have been deficient from the point of view of American interests and craft targeted strategies that allow us to address those lacunae. And so we need to, I think, get the president to rethink how he thinks about the larger questions of global integration, and to recognize that the US investments in creating that system of global integration, first and foremost, have actually advanced America's own interests, and that it would be a pity to lose those benefits. And then there are other things that have to be said about our alliance system and the need to protect our capabilities. But I would go back to reassuring him on one point, that if you believe that making America great again is not just a slogan, then he is absolutely right. He needs to pay serious attention to renewing the foundations of American power at home. There's no question. And if we don't pay attention to renewing those foundations at home, then many of the things that we want to do in Asia will essentially come a crop. So I do want to tell him that he was right. You know, the core objective of making America great again is wonderful. But I think the way he plans to go about doing it may not exactly be the right strategy called for in the times. And if he really wants to pay attention to making America great again, then I would suggest that we pay close attention to the imbalances in our public finances. We pay close attention to what is it we need to do to build a labor force that is capable of coping with the challenges of globalization, and that we pay close attention to what is necessary to improve America's capacity for innovation and productivity. And if he does that, I think we'll start off on a good note.